Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here today. Welcome to the Carolina Community Coalition, where we host guest speakers each month to share about research, programs, initiatives, and trends to really help us keep a pulse on the issues that our students are experiencing. Because we have 420 coming up, Elle is joining us from LRADAC to talk about cannabis trends. Over time, we've been seeing more and more products coming up on the market and becoming more readily accessible to our students. And we are just really excited to hear from her today. Sorry, I just lost my bio. Here we go. Elle Naylor serves as the Community Services Prevention Specialist for LRADAC. Her work focuses on sharing accurate, accessible prevention information and supporting community-wide efforts that reduce risk, build protective factors, and promote well-being. LRADAC offers a wide variety of prevention, intervention, and treatment programs to residents of Richland and Lexington counties. And LRADAC has been a really great partner to USC, and we greatly appreciate all of the work that they do to serve our community. And Elle, I'll go ahead and turn it over to you. And you're on mute.
Thank you. Hey everybody. My name is Elle Naylor, as Jenna mentioned. Thanks for hopping on. I will share my screen in a second, but a quick intro about me is I went to USC, so this is really fun for me. And I am the only one in my prevention office right now, so I do love human interaction if possible. Um, I'm always a fan of turning the camera on or coming off mute, doing the chat, whatever it is. So I will share my screen. This is a fun topic. I started my morning at an elementary school and talking with kids. And it's funny to finish it talking with university members in coalition about trends. So that kind of explains a little bit about the work we do and the scope of it all. This was a fun topic to kind of dive into because we know cannabis is such a wide field, and I'll kind of touch on that in a second. But a little bit of an overview. I'm sure a lot of you are familiar already with LRADAC, Lexington Richland Alcohol and Drug Abuse Council. We're on Colonial Drive near Sager Park, and we do provide services to college students. I know a lot of times they don't take us up on that, but we do, and there are some in our services right now. But we are providing pathways for prevention and recovery from substance misuse. We want people to be informed, have those best practices, and it's not always all or nothing, but just helping people to make those healthy decisions as they navigate life and what matters to them. So we serve about 5,000 clients annually. We are that spectrum prevention to treatment, and we did just open up a residential facility in this building as well. So we're always looking to expand and meet the needs of the community and the gaps. But I already shared I went to USC. I studied public health, and that led me straight here. I did my senior thesis in college on alcohol use disorder and protective factors, risk factors. So it kind of just led me right into prevention, where we focus a lot on protective factors and risk factors. I really enjoy what I do, and I'm very thankful for USC and the public health education that I got. So basically, we're going to look at what has changed about cannabis. We've heard about it, we know about it. There's a lot that maybe has just stayed the same, but there's a lot that's changed. Current trends and forms of consumption, and maybe the physical and mental health risks, as well as some ways that we can support people and feel confident discussing that with other people. But before we jump in, I would love to hear if you guys are able to come off mute or type in the chat about who you are, what your role is, why this might be of interest to you, what you're seeing right now, what you've noticed, what you've heard, any questions you might have, really just anything.
I've been seeing THC drinks everywhere.
Definitely. And I can't see the chat, so if someone does type in there.
I feel like it it just feels like so incredibly common. I think like to um whoever mentioned like the drinks, I think it's just like so common, but Amy always keeps us in the loop that it's so much different than maybe like what we were originally learning about cannabis use and or misuse. And so I think that that is like why I like to continue having these conversations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Just
Always
like
changing.
always new ways to like always new product, always new ways people are using it, frequency, all the things.
Yeah, thank you. And definitely the Delta variants. It gets really confusing with what's being sold, what's labeled on packages, what the laws are, what's legal. It's a whole world. So I saw that in the chat, definitely. Um, yeah. And then I'm sure we see the drinks, but then also the vapes and the dab pens. I'm sure you guys are hearing and seeing that. Um, and then we know people like the normal blunts and joints. Like there's different people that like different things. So yeah. Um, thanks. Let's see. So the only oh, I'm seeing is this square on y'all's too? I'll hide it. Um, really, what has stayed the same and what has changed? One thing we can say about THC and cannabis is that it's always changing. We're seeing that. You guys have already hit on that. Um, so there's been changes in potency. This is just a little overview, but potency, how strong these products are, a lot of times people don't realize it's not as mild as it might have been when older generations were using the products. It's a lot stronger. There's a lot more effects on that. Its forms, we've already talked about that. The ways it's being consumed, accessibility, it's being sold and marketed in a lot of new ways, whether that's in person or online. And then hitting on those loopholes and legalizations and those hemp derivatives, just like you guys shared. So kind of some changes in the environment and the market, but then when we look at people's perceptions, there's also that change in how much it's being used. So we'll see some stats where it's kind of gone up, but maybe not as many people as we feel and think are using it. And then the perception. There is a declining risk perception. A lot more people are reporting that they don't feel like it's harmful. There's no risk to that. And it's interesting to see how the laws and the marketing and the product placement might be playing a role into that. And then also normalization of vaping. So we've kind of seen these trends and behaviors and perceptions along with what the products are changing. So this is just a little bit of an overview about prevalence, usage, demographics, methods, but we see that in 2022, 22% of the US population reported above age 12 reported using cannabis in the past year, and that nearly doubles what was reported in 2002. So in the last 20 years, we've seen that growing trend. But also noting that even though it might feel like everybody's using, it's important to know as we even talk to college students and whoever that that's still 22%. That's still a fourth, 1 in 4 of the population. That's not the majority. And we know those positive norms play a role in people's perception of how normalized it is. Um, But we also see that's the kind of the same stat, but the use has increased by 65% between 2015 and 2024. Daily use has become more common than daily alcohol use. That could be because it's a different product, not many people are consuming alcohol every single day. But then we also know that young adults, 18 to 25, have the highest prevalence of cannabis use. 38% reporting use, still less than half. But college students are in that young adult range, and we hear a lot of times that either they started using in high school, which I have a lot of involvement with high school, and we see that a lot. But then also they'll come to college and maybe freshman year or a little bit later start using. So it's a very crucial age range in their life. We know their brains are still developing. Then we also see that while smoking is still the most common method, the vaping and dabbing are very popular among the young adults. And we'll kind of get into what that looks like, specific risks, things like that. Another statistic is 3 in 10 people who use cannabis have cannabis use disorder. So a lot of times when we think about risk, we might be thinking more physical health or driving or something like that, but then also just thinking about how it does have a risk for cannabis use disorder. It does have that addictive component that a lot of people don't realize. So just bringing that in, and that's a 2024 statistic. I'll try to share these with you guys after, but I shared this little link, an article from the APA, and it talks about the changing landscape. I just thought it had some key points that were interesting. It talks about how the high potency cannabis, this is new, uncharted territory, and a lot of the studies that were done were with lower potency products. So when people talk about studies and medical marijuana and things like that, that's just important to keep in mind. A lot of the products being sold are so extreme and not what's necessarily being used in these studies. And then as I hit on the misconception that it is not addictive, that is important as we have these conversations. And then also knowing that with these high potency products, they're being linked with withdrawal symptoms, the cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which I'll hit on that later, and then cannabis-induced psychosis. So the higher the potency, there are those mental and physical risks as well. Who is familiar with the potency numbers? Sometimes I feel like I share this a lot, but maybe we're not all as familiar. But I thought this was so interesting, and I've been seeing it a lot more. Cannabis in the 90s and the 80s and whenever, the natural plant had about 4% THC. And over the years, they've been kind of modifying it, making the natural plant stronger as they do. And so now that has about 30% THC. So even the plant, the flower itself is more potent. That is a very significant increase in a psychoactive component. And then when we get into THC vapes, dab pens, other concentrated products, even edibles, they can have up to 60 to 90% THC. And so that's where you're going to see a lot more of those mental health risks and the psychosis and things like that, as well as the dependence. So maybe people didn't think cannabis was as addictive because back then it was only 4% THC, but now the products that are popular and sold have a lot stronger of that THC component. So that's always something I love to point out. There's a quote on there that says, extreme anything is unsafe. So the more you have of anything, the more risk you're going to have. Accessibility. So one thing, if you guys get bored one day, I love to just go on websites where they sell edibles and vapes and THC products and just read and see how are they marketing this? What are they describing this as? You'll see it's very accessible online. All you have to do is say, yep, I'm 21. And then also just the gray market. There's a lot of products being sold that may be THC, they may not be. and no one's really going behind and checking that, the vape shops would be a great place to get these products. And they are all around us in Columbia, especially around campus and Five Points and things like that. They're selling some of the products that we'll see in a second, as well as gas stations and convenience stores. And then I mentioned social media just because as I started to look online at these websites, I think my social media found out and I was seeing reels and things like that where it was just promoting THC drinks and stuff like that. And it almost convinced me. I was like, oh, these seem cool. Not really. But we'll talk a little bit more about marketing in a second. So as mentioned, we have our hemp derivatives, Delta 9, that is the standard. There's a lot of confusion, I think, even for consumers, for professionals, for people selling the products. There's a lot of confusion in gray area where Delta 9 is that standard THC. But then we also have Delta 8 and Delta 10 that act very similar but are somehow legal. We have THCA, which turns to THC when it's heated or smoked. So if you ever see something being marketed as THCA, that's like a legal alternative, but as soon as it's heated up, it's acting and turning into THC. So that's kind of like South Carolina's legal weed. And then there's also the THC versus CBD confusion where we don't quite know a ton about CBD. And now we have a lot of products that just say THC and they don't really explain which delta, is it from cannabis, is it from hemp, things like that. It's really just they've figured out a way to take these THC products and put them into what they want them to be in. And I did include the loophole just to remind us, because I know we hear about it, we know about it, but just how it explains that the 0.3% THC limit was more so about the plant, not the finished products, and how it doesn't really regulate those finished products as much. And so people will kind of get under that loophole with, oh, it's hemp. It passes. And you'll see that if you go and scroll on those websites, they explain how their product fits into the loophole, but then they don't really explain if it's legal for the user, like if I were to take this and then have a drug test, I would still be in trouble, but not the company. So getting into our trends, the ways it's being consumed, I don't really think any of this will be terribly new information to us just because we're informed, we're watching what's going on, we're hearing, but it might clarify and give us a little more insight. So obviously inhalation, whether that is joints, rolls, and blunts, kind of your more typical, I don't know the word, typical form of consumption, also bongs and pipes, and then we'll get into dab pens and vapes as well as backwoods. We know that this is still the most dominant and common form of use. And that anything you're inhaling is going to have those health risks. Anything that's not oxygen is going to harm your respiratory system. It's going to get into your lungs. So I know sometimes people think cannabis, it's natural, it's from the plant. But we will see how these different products still have those harms, whether that's the chemicals or the tar, things like that. Also knowing bongs and water pipes, they don't filter out any harmful chemicals. And then just like we're concerned about vaping nicotine and the damage it can do to lungs, that's also still a concern with vaping cannabis products. And backwoods, knowing that sometimes people combine cannabis with nicotine, so that can make that even more of an addictive component. Just a simple overview of blunts, rolls, pre-rolls. What was that? Is just noting, like I mentioned, that these are still emitting particles into our lungs and still have those harms. So carbon monoxide, ammonia, heavy metals, nitrosamines, I'm not good at that word. Those are cancer-causing components and chemicals. And those are being consumed into lungs, even with a typical blunt, even without a vape. So just breaking it down, they're very similar. One has no tobacco, the other has tobacco. And then I did want to mention infused pre-rolls, which you can buy them already rolled. You don't have to do it yourself. And infused means they're infused with cannabis concentrates. So that stronger THC, whether that's kief, hash, wax, oil, but they're infused with that to increase the potency. So people might still be smoking just like a roll or blunt, but it might have even more THC than it did before. So we know people are always looking for more. Um, it says that it's generally suited for people with a higher tolerance. You'll kind of see a theme of experienced users. That's kind of the language that the cannabis industry likes to call people that have developed a higher tolerance for products and are using more frequently. So it kind of becomes a culture thing, but just mentioning that concentrated infused pre-roll was interesting to me. Now we're getting into vaporizers, so I've divided them into disposable vapes and then dab pens and cartridges. There's a lot of similarities here. Basically, there's a concentrate and it's being heated up. It's not being burned, it's being vaporized. But a vapor in this context is not just water vapor. We know it has a lot of other chemicals that come with it. So these are some examples of disposable vapes. I wasn't going into the vape shops and looking at what's going on in Colombia, but I just wanted to include some in the way that they appear. So they do look very similar to a nicotine vape. Very cute, kind of trendy, not really questionable, flavor filled, things like that. And so I did bring some of our little nicotine vapes and just showing you how these do look really similar. And we'll see a lot of how the cannabis industry, they are merging their products with things that are already pretty socially acceptable so that the people that want to use them can use them. And so the people that are interested feel like, oh, this isn't so different. So those are just some examples. These are usually single use, and they have a higher THC content. So the the vapes, the dab pens, things like that, they are a lot stronger. They're in that 60 to 90% THC. And these, as we know, are popular with our young people. And this is a more controlled option than dabbing, which we'll get into. But another one that's common is a vape cartridge. So this one is not necessarily as disposable. It is also a concentrate. Both of these are liquid. Um, and it's sometimes called a cart. So I've had high schoolers call it that. But if you ever hear that, that's what that is. They come pre-filled, maybe like in the little package on the right, and you'll screw it onto the battery or the device, and you just kind of have to turn it on, and it heats it up and it vaporizes it, and you get to take a hit. Take one or two, and you're good to go. Because they do have that high THC content. So this one also popular. And I went ahead and did a little bit of a breakdown over here because I know we hear 60 to 90% THC, but then you also hear milligrams, and so that can get a little bit confusing. But this shows how if this cartridge, if this vape had 60 to 90% THC and it was 1 gram or 1,000 milligrams, then it shows how much THC that would have, and that's 600 to 900 milligrams. And then breaking that down even further, one single puff would be 2 to 5 milligrams of THC, which, as I've scavenged the websites, they often recommend 2.5 for beginners. Even that can be a little bit strong. 5 milligrams is somewhere in the middle, but then we know that a lot of times people aren't just doing a single puff and calling it a day, especially when it's so accessible. It might not really be bothering anyone else. It becomes more of a habit. So there's a lot more potential for people to get a high amount of THC and then not really just be like, okay, that's enough for the day or that's enough for the week. So we can see how this can contribute to people having that higher tolerance and maybe a dependence. The last vaporizer is a dab pen. I know sometimes we hear weed pens, dab pens. Sometimes they call them Benjamins, maybe more high schoolers than college students. But this one is a little more high tech than just buying a disposable. It is more for solid concentrates, so wax or shatter. This is also a high potency product, but the person using it would manually load it in. You can see maybe where it would go in there. And then it has coils that heat up and then turn that solid into a vapor. Not really a vapor, more like an aerosol, because it's chemicals and stuff. But as I mentioned with the other ones, it's stronger, even stronger than the other products, and has that increased risk of overusing it and developing a dependence. So this is kind of one of your stronger than maybe a more natural blunt. Some people will argue that this is maybe healthier because you're not getting as many of those toxins. It's more like it's just the product being heated up into a vapor. You're not burning anything, there's no smoke. But we also know that there's really no, this is healthy, this is not, because you're kind of choosing maybe lung health, not really because it's vaping, but we also have to consider the brain. Maybe while this one you're not inhaling as much smoke, you're getting a lot more THC, and so that's affecting the brain, your mental health, the way that you are performing cognitively. So this similarly breaks down a dab pen, very similar in the THC concentration or percentage, but that single puff can be even stronger, so 2 to 10 milligrams of THC. Does anyone have questions before we move to edibles? Um, so edibles have been around for a minute. We have a closet with some supplies, and this is an edible that has an expiration date of 2014. So this one is 12 years old, obviously still packaged up, but that just shows that these aren't necessarily new. They are definitely evolving. Um, Here's another one that's a lot more recent. This brand is actually, I found it online too, so it's definitely still around, but this one's called Not Your Son's Weed. Looks a lot cuter. This one's from the last year or two. So even within these products, this one I want to say has 5 milligrams, and this one has 50 milligrams each. So we can see how the products are evolving in their strength and potency and the look of it all. But
A
a
little
few
bit.
takeaways to know about edibles.
Can you hold the products up a little bit more to the camera?
Yes, sorry, I can't see myself, so
Uh, yeah, that's a
um,
problem.
here you
Thank
go.
you.
So this is the 2012, 14, and then 2023. And let's see, I had it earlier. I think it's 5 milligrams. And then this one over here is 50 milligrams per gummy, which is insane because then people are like, oh, obviously the law is keeping us safe. No, it's not. So some things to know about edibles, and I've actually heard this from people I talk to. They take a lot longer to digest, up to 2 hours. So a lot of times it can be really tricky and dangerous for someone if they eat one and they don't feel anything, and then they take another one, and then at some point they've consumed too much, they've had a cannabis THC overdose, which is really just like vomiting and can cause paranoia because we know high THC can cause paranoia and panic. So it's also very difficult for people to tell how much is in a dose, whether that's a brownie product or a cookie or something that's being sold at a store. Um, but I've heard of high schoolers who have told me, oh yeah, I went to the store and I bought edibles and I ate one and then I had like my face in my cereal. I'm not making this up either. So I think there's a lot of confusion even for users that are familiar with cannabis of not knowing how it affects their body and how much is too much. I know sometimes there will be multiple doses in one gummy, but these two both say serving size is 1 piece, so that makes that easier. But gummies and edibles can be anywhere from 2.5 milligrams all the way to 100. So that's just one thing to note. We see that Stony Patch, I think they did get sued, but obviously they are marketing in a fun and whatever the way is. Some might do the more natural marketing, some might do the more this is going to make you high, psychedelic marketing, but whatever it is, they are definitely embracing their designs and their flavors and things like that. Um, Getting into the drinks and the seltzers, this one is definitely very interesting. We've all been watching it happen. Um, I think the one have seen the longest is High Rise being marketed on the gas stations. I would be driving around. We do our environmental scans in different areas of the counties, and I would see it and go, no. Um, so especially interesting for us in South Carolina. But I have honestly had a lot of fun watching and reading the THC drink websites. I would recommend. They are really marketing themselves against alcohol, and we'll see that in a second. But I think that they're finding this niche of maybe people don't drink, they're tired of it, they don't like the way it makes them feel. Um, Maybe they're even marketing as like a sober alternative, which is very questionable. But we see this kind of everywhere. Not falling from the sky, not like a fearful way, but this is a picture I took at a gas station in Columbia. I was actually just waiting on someone and I was looking around, so I love to just see what's being sold. They do market as 21 plus, but other than that, it's kind of up to you to figure that out. But there's brands in here that are selling like margaritas. There's a Delta brand nowadays, High Rise, just different ones like that. Some of these are more local. So very easy, very similar to a seltzer or a beer. But one thing to know about a drink and a seltzer is that it's a lot easier to feel the effects of these. So maybe a user might like that more. I feel like this could be their way of competing with edibles, where it can take only 15 to 20 minutes. Um, so you'll feel it faster. And then that doesn't mean the effects wear off any faster, but we see these drinks are most commonly divided into the 2.5, 5, or 10 milligrams. And the websites do explain, like, depending on what kind of user you are, what experience you want to have, like, they do recommend that. And they give this appearance of you are in control, which is helpful, I guess. So this is just me brainstorming and would love to hear from y'all, but what audience do you guys think that the THC beverage industry might be targeting? Or maybe they're not a specific one.
This is Elisa from Student Conduct, and to me, this looks like very casual use. Like if you're going to the pool with friends or you going to the lake with friends, you're not planning to do something major. Like I wouldn't, go to the pool and smoke weed, but oh, this is no big deal. It seems very casual.
Absolutely. That's social use. That's even how they're marketing it on their websites.
I think that this in particular, like the drinks and seltzer piece, is potentially could be really targeted towards women.
Women,
Mhm.
yeah, because it feels more maybe dainty, cute, like normalized. It's normal to have a little drink. Yeah.
I'd say people that are like sober curious from like alcohol, but still want something.
Yes, sober curious. That is definitely a term. California sober, sober curious. Yeah. Which is very misleading, I would say. Yeah. Um, so definitely people that either are already familiar with drinking alcohol or that want an alternative. Um, People that are out and about. So one thing about seltzers and THC beverages, they're being sold at gas stations. That's a very normal place. They're being sold at breweries. So they're kind of hopping on board. They're like, if you can't beat them, join them. And then they're sold at restaurants. And I saw a few local Columbia restaurants that y- popped up on the internet that said that they had certain products. So definitely normalizing a substance that maybe certain people wouldn't have already leaned towards. Um, yeah. So these are some screenshots as, and I could have probably found more in the vape ones too, but I was just so interested in these. This one is a high-rise ad that came up on my Facebook and said, this was probably supposed to be a 20-minute hang. 4 hours and 6 empty cans later, here we are, no notes. And so kind of promoting that idea of like, oh, it was going to be kind of boring, but here we are, and now you don't remember anything, but you had fun. Um, so kind of like the fun experience of it all. This one, taste first, cannabis included. Remember the night, forget the hangover. So leaning into the you're not going to feel a hangover afterwards. And I've actually had a friend tell me that that has interested her about these products. So I wonder if she came to that conclusion on her own or if she was also influenced. Um, but then this one over here is talking about it being balanced, functional, perfect for seasoned consumers, high tolerance. This is the 10 milligram one. So kind of just saying like swapping cocktails for something cleaner and more flavorful. Definitely feels like a competition between alcohol, and they are leaning into people's curiosity. This one really struck my attention because it says mocktails. And a lot of times when you hear mocktail, that's either people that don't drink or maybe don't want to drink that night and they don't want to be under the influence of something. That feels like the safe option for anybody. And so a mocktail recipe and then including a THC beverage in that recipe feels very misleading to me. But I guess that's up for people to figure out on their own. Um, this last picture, I took this picture at brunch in Columbia somewhere, and I was just sitting there. And then I looked up and read the sign, and I guess I could tell you all the brand, but it's called Only. I think it's pretty local, but I thought their marketing was interesting as well. It's uplifting, it's mellow, and you can have more than one. It kind of gives that you're in control experience as well as 1 hour experience. There's a lot of misleading and confusing messaging on how long are the effects going to last. A lot of times the websites have this little graph where it's like within 20, 30 minutes, you'll feel this, and then you'll go right back to where you were. Um, and then this one's saying an hour, but then later on, I think I included that it could last up to 6 to 10 hours where you might not be feeling the high, but you are still impaired. So kind of misleading as well. Also, when people use it to feel better and then they're going back to how they felt before, if someone's wanting to use it for mental health purposes, I could see that being difficult if they're feeling good for a second and then going back. It definitely becomes a cycle. So this kind of just summarizes a lot of the things we saw, but I know that a lot of people care about health and wellness, and so these products are becoming more and more wellness oriented and natural as what they sound like. Good times, experiences, and then that alcohol-free buzz and sober, I was seeing a lot. They market it as safe stress relief, maybe in the moment, but also knowing that if someone is using a substance to relieve stress over and over again, that is considered self-medication and is going to have those negative mental health effects. And so there's a lot of messaging that they're not explaining to their users. But definitely creating this culture of like, I take the edge off with a substance and there's not going to be any impact on my body. That's kind of the message that I get when I read that. I already mentioned the experienced users, but I was seeing that term a lot. Kind of feels like, oh, I got this figured out. I'm like part of the club. And then the other thing to note is that these websites are doing a really good job of being forthcoming with information and providing information about the milligrams and saying, like in the fine print, start slow, try half, try one, and then see where you go from there. And so it's good that they're saying that information. I'm not sure that everybody's reading it or abiding by that. But I also did notice that as I would try to research information, I would end up on a blog post from either an edible or a vape or a beverage website that's selling cannabis. And so you kind of end up reading from their point of view. So they're definitely doing a lot to be up there in the search results, in the social media and things like that. And they do a pretty good job of vouching for themselves. So that was interesting to me. Any thoughts or questions? Just kind of giving an overview of physical and mental health effects. I didn't want to say too much of what we already know. I think we're all familiar with how cannabis is a psychoactive substance and it causes users to feel euphoria and high and impairment, things like that. So I didn't want to overly do that, but kind of just looking from a overview of some of those risks that could be there. So this is specifically looking at brain function, especially as we consider that young adults and college students might be using these products out and about during the day, in class, while they're driving, or if they're choosing cannabis drinks as an alternative to drinking, maybe some of the ways that its effects on the brain could impact the user. So we know like the altered senses of time, space, mood changes, the issues with thinking and problem solving, which that might feel fun in the moment, impaired memory, that disorientation and confusion, relaxation, dizziness, issues with coordination, slowed reaction time, and then even that panic attack feeling, especially with the higher strength products and someone who is not used to that. So obviously these are going to be effects that impact driving, normal life, things like that. If someone feels like this is how they cope with stress and they're doing their school on campus, I could see this being an issue when you're trying to focus and feel like you're getting things done. It's more of just like an avoiding feeling. So good things to keep in mind with the brain. Those are the short-term effects. This is a visual, just kind of saying it does impact the entire body, not just the lungs, not just the brain. But we have those endocannabinoid receptors all over the body, with the nervous system, with the immune system. So this just gives a really great visual of how it does impact your brain with all the things we just mentioned. Your spinal cord, your lungs, their health, their function, your heart, your cardiovascular system, even your reproductive system. And so maybe college students care a little bit about that. So that one's interesting. And then getting into that immune system, it's going to impact your immune function and your ability to stay healthy with digestion, different organs in your body. It really is impacting the entire body, as well as like your stress response. A lot of times it's marketed as this is going to help you with your stress, but only if you keep using it, and it doesn't help you when you're not using the product. It actually inhibits that stress regulation. Some specific physical health risks that I pulled out were the CHS syndrome. And this one is not, super common, but it is more severe. And this would come from the high potency products, maybe more regular use. And it's a disorder that causes nausea, vomiting, abdominal pain. Users are really uncomfortable and need hot showers for relief. And this is something that doesn't even stop until you completely quit cannabis. And so there's no real treatment for it other than completely stop using the substance. So it can be really dangerous, especially if you're vomiting and sweating and dehydrated and all of those things. So that's one that I think is good to mention. Obviously, those cardiovascular health risks and your heart's ability to be strong, it's going to put a lot more pressure on that. Then lung health, no matter how you're breathing in a product, whether you're smoking it or vaping it, it's going to be harmful to your lung tissue, cause scarring, and damage your small blood vessels, and then increase your risk of bronchitis. I've already mentioned impaired driving, but I really believe that that is one that is so up in the air right now for what's the best practice legally, things like that. Because we know that impairment can last a really long time, 4 to 10 hours, even though the user might feel ready to drive, which can be a little confusing if you're drinking a beverage out at a brewery or dinner or something like that. I will say the beverages feel a little more toned down on the amount of THC in the single drink. So it does allow for more user control, as they say. So someone can take a sip, they can drink, they can share, they can have just one. But I am kind of interested to see how people behave because binge drinking is so common here. And I wonder if people would try to binge drink THC beverages and how that would affect people psychoactively. DUI laws, we know that if you are impaired, no matter if that's THC or alcohol, you're at risk for getting a DUI. And if you get pulled over and you have THC in your system, that can also be an issue because it's not necessarily legal here. And so these are just some things that maybe if you have younger people to talk to about it, have those conversations and think about those healthy decisions as it becomes more common. Let's see it. Okay, I'm just messing up. I love to talk about mental health, and I worry more about people's dependence and mental health and ability to deal with stress and anxiety and depression. I think that that's what impacts people day to day more than your risk for bronchitis. And so the mental health and cannabis links are really interesting to me. I've seen that there are a lot of studies and links that it does worsen those symptoms and it does increase your risk. People who already have those anxiety and depression and mental health issues are going to be at more of a risk for them worsening and for having more mental health issues because of cannabis. So here's a little visual. Sometimes we give out these cannabis and mental health brochures, and that just excites me because there's such this message that it's a way to cope and deal with stress, but we aren't really getting the full picture when that's all we're hearing. So we know that it is worsening those symptoms. Cannabis-induced psychosis, that is becoming more common with high potency products, especially in areas where cannabis is legal. So I've actually watched videos and read things about the rates of that in Colorado and emergency room visits due to cannabis. So basically, this cannabis-induced psychosis is people are paranoid, they are kind of out of touch with reality and not able to communicate what they are experiencing. They might be hearing things, seeing things. It's kind of just this combination, as we would kind of see with other psychotic episodes. It's just induced by cannabis because it's a psychoactive chemical compound that's really strong on the brain. So that's something that can be really dangerous if people are paranoid. They can put themselves at danger. Others, I've seen articles where people will injure or kill someone, which sounds very severe. And then also knowing with those higher potency or with more frequent use, people are more at risk of dependence and addiction. Then specifically with brain health, we know that it affects your brain function, your memory, learning, attention, ability to make those decisions as they're supposed to be made, coordination, reaction time, and some of these effects can last up to 28 days after use. And so I think that's a good fact for college students as they're navigating focusing and dealing with stress and getting their assignments done, and wanting to be the best version of themselves they can be. I did mention or include the cannabis use disorder criteria or signs, just because a lot of times people that use cannabis regularly might be experiencing these, but feel like it's normal. I have a friend slash neighbor who has been using cannabis every single day since her freshman year of college, and now she's graduated. And she tells me, "Oh, I just use a little bit at night to go to bed, but it's really like it's not a problem." But obviously, if you feel like you need it to go to sleep or to focus on your tasks, or if you're using a lot of your time trying to use or trying to quit or craving it, it might be on some level of a cannabis use disorder. Maybe you're putting yourself in danger while driving a car, or you're using it even though it's impacting schoolwork or relationships or your home life. And so students that are choosing the feeling of getting high or using cannabis over their assignments or going to class or things like that, that could be an indicator. It's not our job to diagnose, but just keeping these things in mind of how it's not necessarily easy peasy, I'm gonna go wind down with my friends, but that it could become more of a disorder and it can impact those areas of our life. So this is very brief, but just knowing the ways that you can support people. If someone's using cannabis regularly to relax, they might not be able to relax on their own. You could be the person to have those open conversations with them and support them in whatever that looks like. I briefly have a little overview of our intervention and treatment services. We do walk-in assessments during our assessment hours, but just knowing that if someone is seeking help to reduce how much they're using or seeing the ways it's impacting their mental health or their life, we have counseling, specific for young adults or teens. And then our detox and residential, we have peer support. So just a little overview there. So we're kind of wrapping up, but I just shared a lot of information about trends, risks, concerns, what we're seeing, maybe even some little myth busters. So would love to just hear maybe some ways that you guys feel like this information is beneficial to you in the work you're doing, and the relationships that you have, and maybe one thing you might want to take away from that.
I think it's helpful just to know the different products that if someone is bringing it up in a conversation, I like know better what they're talking about. I can kind of like identify, more information.
Yeah, definitely. I feel like when you're so out of the loop on what's trending, you don't really even know how to give factual information and support someone in that. Yep. Anyone else? It's like 4 p.m. on a Thursday. This is a little brain dump just of kind of action steps where this is a topic that is, people have their opinions, legal versus not, do it versus don't. And so, especially with older young adults, older adults, we can have those open conversations, and we're past the like, don't do it, but kind of like getting into the why and the what and how does it actually impact us. And I always think it's helpful to integrate that with courses, conversations with projects, things that are going on. And then being able to recognize the signs of high potency THC use, maybe people in our life that might be using those products. And then obviously, I think that college students being the leaders, the ambassadors, and the voices are much more effective than any faculty or community member being that voice. And I know that the students that have been involved in like Sape on campus tabling and things like that, when they share information, I was a lot more receptive as a student. So just giving students the opportunities to be the leaders and do the research and be the voice, whether that's in a school project or out on campus. And then just wanted to like remind that some of those misconceptions we can keep in mind and make sure that we address them. So just because something is like less harmful doesn't mean it's not harmful, and we must consider like the holistic way that it impacts a body and a brain and a person. It's not just weed. We know it's a lot stronger, a lot more potent, and there's some of those stronger risks associated. And then also most college students, most students and most people are not using substances and are not using cannabis. We just see it being marketed and we see the people that are, maybe we smell the people that are, and so it feels like it's everywhere. And so challenging us not to say it's everywhere and that everybody's doing it, because that can actually influence people to make it feel like it is more normalized. So those are just a few thoughts there. Some resources, obviously SAMHSA and CDC are pretty self-explanatory, but I did think that this One Chance to Grow Up, it's from Colorado, and so it gives some interesting perspective if you're wanting maybe to see someone's perspective. But some resources, and that's all. But would love to hear if you guys have any questions. I know I just covered a lot, and it is 4:30.
Thank you so much, Elle. Since we are at 4:30, I'll go ahead and wrap this up, but anyone can feel free to reach out with any questions that they might have afterwards. Thank you all so much again for being here. Our last meeting of the semester is going to be May 7th at 3:30 p.m. We will offer that one in a hybrid format, and that's going to be our annual year in review meeting where we'll be talking about trends, successes, and challenges, and hearing from our campus partners from all different areas across campus. And this is going to be a great way to reflect on the past year and identify some of our priorities for 2026 to 2027, which is crazy that we're even at the point where we are action planning for that. Location for in-person will be to be determined, but if you want to join virtually, it'll be the same link that you used for today. And thank you again so much, Elle, for your time. This was really informative and definitely helpful to, like, I did not know the difference between dabs and vapes until now, so I know I learned a lot, and I hope that other folks did as well. But thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you all for participating and sharing.
You all have a great day.